A kludge is a workaround or quick and dirty solution that is clumsy, inelegant, inefficient, difficult to extend and hard to maintain. It is a rough synonym to the term jury rig. This term is used in diverse fields such as computer science, aerospace engineering, internet slang, evolutionary neuroscience, and government. Pronunciation and etymology. The word has alternate spellings, pronunciations and several proposed etymologies. Jackson W. Granum equals, in the Oxford English Dictionary, the Kludge entry cites one source for this word's earliest recorded usage, definition and etymology, Jackson W. Granum's 1962, How to Design a Kludge article, which appeared in the American computer magazine Datamation. Kludge also kludge. J. W. Granum's jocular invention, see first quote. Cf. also bodge v, fudge v. An ill-assorted collection of poorly matching parts, forming a distressing whole. E-spin computing, a machine, system, or program that has been improvised or bodged together. A hastily improvised and poorly thought-out solution to a fault or bug. A euro. Although OED accepts Granum's definition and credits him with the invention, examples of its use before the 1960s exist. A source of some confusion has been Granum's jocular citation of the wholly fictitious lexicographer, Fernese Berling, of the firm Fink and Wiggles as confirming the Germanic origin of the word. A phone call to Fernese Berling can be revealing. Fernese Berling is the chief calligrapher with the Fink and Wiggles Publishing Company, Incorporated. Fink and Wiggles are, of course, the well-known publishers of the New Multilingual Dictionary. According to Berling, the word kludge first appeared in the English language in the early 1500s. It was imported into the geographic region of the lowlands between King's Lynn and the Isle of Ely by Dutch settlers arriving there to reclaim tidelands of the Wash's rutabaga fields. The word kludges, according to Berling, derived from the same root as the German klug, originally meaning smart, or witty. In the typical machinations of language and evolutionary growth, the word kludge eventually came to mean not so smart, or pretty ridiculous. Today the leading definition given by the New Multilingual is, an ill-assorted collection of poorly matching parts, forming a distressing whole. It is in this latter sense that kludge is used by computer hardware men. Today kludge forms one of the most beloved words in design terminology, and it stands ready for handy application to the work of anyone who gins up 110-volt circuitry to plug into the 220 VAC source. The building of a kludge, however, is not work for amateurs. There is a certain, indefinable, masochistic finesse that must go into true kludge building. The professional can spot it instantly. The amateur may readily presume that that's the way computers are. Claims about derivation from the German adjective klug meaning clever are unlikely for the following reasons. There is no equivalent usage in German, both pronunciations of the word contain the soft G, which is not present in German. The word emerges in English only in the 20th century. Yiddish equals, American Yiddish speakers use klug to mean too smart by half, the reflected meaning of German klug clever. This may explain the idea of clever but clumsy in temporary, as well as the pronunciation variation from German. European surname equals, it may instead derive from the mispronunciation of European surname kludge. Even if Berling's etymology were true, it is doubtful that the American military or computer engineers, who began using the term in the 20th century, could have been aware of a term that had fallen from use in East Anglia sometime in the preceding 400 years. This OED2 entry also includes the verb kludge to improvise with a kludge or kludges, and kludgemanship skill in designing or applying kludges. Military jargon equals, the jargon file, which is a glossary of computer programmer slang maintained by Eric S. Raymond, differentiates kludge from kludge and cites usage examples predating 1962. Kludge, N. Incorrect spelling of kludge. These two words have been confused in American usage since the early 1960s, and widely confounded in Great Britain since the end of World War II. TMRC a crock that works. B. To use a kludge to get around a problem. I've kludged around it for now, but I'll fix it up properly later. This jargon file entry notes Kludge apparently derives via British military slang from Scots cludge or clugey, meaning a common toilet, and became confused with US kludge during or after World War II. Kludge, from the German Klug, clever. POS related to Polish and Russian Klutch, N. A Rube Goldberg device, whether in hardware or software. N. A clever programming trick intended to solve a particular nasty case in an expedient, if not clear, manner. Often used to repair bugs. Often involves ad hocery and verges on being a crock. N. Something that works for the wrong reason, VT. To insert a kludge into a program. I've kludged this routine to get around that weird bug, but there's probably a better way. WPIN. A feature that is implemented in a rude manner. This entry notes Kludge, which is now often spelled Kludge, was the original spelling, reported around computers as far back as the mid-1950s and, at that time, used exclusively of hardware kludges. The jargon file gives possible etymologies from naval slang or printing equipment. Kludge was common Navy slang in the World War II era for any piece of electronics that worked well on shore but consistently failed at sea. A 1947 article in the New York Folklore Quarterly recorded the classic Shaggy Dog story Murgatroyd the Kludge Maker, then current in the armed forces, in which a kludge was a complex and puzzling artifact with a trivial function. The term kludge as an overly complicated or obscure contraption dates back at least to 1947, as evidenced by the article in the New York Folklore Quarterly, but the term must have been in use long before that for the story to have any sense. The following purports to be a summary of the original article that is somewhat more complete than the one quoted above. On being drafted into the Navy, Murgatroyd gave his profession as kludge maker. Not wanting to seem ignorant, the clerk simply wrote this down. Whenever Murgatroyd was asked what he was doing, he said he was making a kludge, and actually he was one of the world's best kludge makers. Not wanting to seem ignorant, his superiors kept giving him commendations and promotions, until he reached the dizzy heights of Commodore. One day the admiral came to inspect the ship. When Murgatroyd explained he was a kludge maker, the admiral asked him what a kludge was, the first person ever to do so. Murgatroyd said it was hard to explain, but he would make one so the admiral could see what it was. After a couple of days, he returned with a complex object. "Interesting," said the admiral, "but what does it do?" In reply, Murgatroyd dropped it over the side of the ship. As the thing sank, it went kludge. The jargon file further includes kludge around to avoid a bug or difficult condition by inserting a kludge up to lash together a quick hack to perform a task. After Granham's 1962, How to Design a Kludge article popularized the kludge variant kludge, both were interchangeably used and confused. The jargon file concludes. The result of this history is a tangle. Many younger U.S. hackers pronounce the word as but spell it, incorrectly for its meaning and pronunciation, as kludge. Euro-British hackers mostly learned orally, use it in a restricted negative sense and are at least consistent. European hackers have mostly learned the word from written American sources and tend to pronounce it but use the wider American meaning. Some observers consider this mess appropriate in view of the word's meaning. Paper feeder equals. Another hypothesis dates to 1907, when John Brandtjen convinced two young machinists from Oslo, Norway named Abel and Neville Kludge to service and install presses for his fledgling printing equipment firm. In 1919, the brothers invented an automatic feeder for printing presses which, by 1929, allowed Brandtjen and Kludge to move into a 3-story building in St. Paul, MN. While the automatic feeder was a success, unverified sources claim that it developed a reputation for being temperamental, subject to frequent breakdowns, and devilishly difficult to repair but oh, so clever. The Kludge brothers continued to innovate, and the company still existed as of 2011. Given that the feeder bore the Kludge name, it seems reasonable that it became a byword for overly complex mechanical contraptions. The free online dictionary of computing claims that the term kludge was used in connection with computers as far back as the mid-1950s and, at that time, was used exclusively of hardware kludges. 1. The fact that it was originally applied only to hardware again points back to the paper feeder as the origin. FOLDOC goes on to say, TMRC and the MIT hacker culture of the early 1960s seems to have developed an milieu that remembered and still used some WWII military slang. It seems likely that Kludge came to MIT via alumni of the many military electronics projects run in Cambridge during the war. This would explain the term's introduction to the software community. This explanation points to a Norwegian surname as the source, with no connection to German. Acronym other suggested folk etymologies or backronyms for Kludge or Kludges from clumsy, lame, ugly, dumb, but good enough, or klutzy, lash up, under, going, engineering. The term Kludge would then seem to have independent origins, possibly in Britain. The terms tended to merge because of their similar pronunciations and meanings. However, Kludge seems to have the sense of overly complicated, while Kludge has only the sense of poorly done. Cf. German Klei, diminutive clap paragraph Aachen Klod, Low Saxon Klut, Klut, Dutch Klut, perhaps related to Low German diminutive Klang quarter dumpling, Klod, Danish Jutland dial. Kleit piece of bad workmanship, Kludge, and standard Danish Klud disorder. Industries. Aerospace engineering In aerospace a Kludge was a temporary design using separate commonly available components that were not flight-worthy in order to proof the design and enable concurrent software development while the integrated components were developed and manufactured. The term was in common enough use to appear in a fictional movie about the U.S. space program. Perhaps the ultimate Kludge was the first U.S. space station, Skylab. Its two major components, the Saturn workshop and the Apollo telescope mount, began development as separate projects. Later the SWS and ATM were folded into the Apollo applications program, but the components were to have been launched separately, then docked in orbit. In the final design, the SWS and ATM were launched together, but for the single launch concept to work, the ATM had to pivot 90 degrees on a truss structure from its launch position to its on-orbit orientation, clearing the way for the crew to dock its Apollo Command Service module at the axial docking port of the multiple docking adapter. The airlock module's manufacturer, McDonnell Douglas, even recycled the hatch design from its Gemini spacecraft and kludged what was originally designed for the conical Gemini command module onto the cylindrical Skylab airlock module. The Skylab project, managed by the National Aeronautics and Space Administration's Marshall Space Flight Center, was seen by the Manned Spacecraft Center as an invasion of its historical role as the NASA Center for Manned Spaceflight. Thus, MSC personnel missed no opportunity to disparage the Skylab project, calling it the Kludge. Computer science In modern computing terminology, a Kludge is a solution to a problem, doing a task, or fixing a system that is inefficient, inelegant or even unfathomable, but which nevertheless works. To kludge around something is to avoid a bug or some difficult condition by building a kludge, perhaps relying on properties of the bug itself to assure proper operation. It is somewhat similar in spirit to a workaround, only without the grace. A kludge is often used to change the behavior of a system after it is finished, without having to make fundamental changes. Sometimes the kludge is introduced in order to keep backwards compatibility, but often it is simply introduced because the kludge is an easier alternative. That something was often originally a crock, which is why it must now be hacked to make it work. Note that a hack might be a kludge, but that hack could be, at least in computing, ironic praise, for a quick-fix solution to a frustrating problem. A kludge is often used to fix an unanticipated problem in an earlier kludge. This is essentially a kind of craft. Something might be a kludge if it fails in corner cases, but this is a less common sense, as such situations are not expected to come up in typical usage. More commonly, a kludge is a poorly working heuristic which was expected to work adequately. An intimate knowledge of the context is typically required to build a corner case kludge. As a consequence, they are sometimes ironically praised. An anecdotal example of a kludge involved a computer part supposedly manufactured in the Soviet Union during the 1960s. The part needed slightly delayed receipt of a signal to work. Rather than setting up a timing system, the kludge was to make the internal wires extra long, increasing the distance and thus increasing the time the electrical signal took to reach its destination. A variation on this use of kludge is evasion of an unknown problem or bug in a computer program. Rather than continue to struggle to find out exactly what is causing the bug and how to fix it, the programmer may hack the problem by the simple kludge of writing new code which compensates. For example, if a variable keeps ending up doubled in a certain code area, add code which divides by 2 when it is used, after the original code has been executed. In computer networking, use of NAT or PAT to cope with a shortage of IPv4 addresses is an example of a kludge. In FIDO.NET terminology, kludge refers to a piece of control data embedded inside a message. Evolutionary neuroscience equals. The kludge or kludge metaphor has been adapted in fields such as evolutionary neuroscience, particularly in reference to the human brain. The neuroscientist David Linden discusses how intelligent design proponents have misconstrued brain anatomy. The transcendent aspects of our human experience, the things that touch our emotional and cognitive core, were not given to us by a great engineer. These are not the latest design features of an impeccably crafted brain. Rather, at every turn, brain design has been a kludge, a workaround, a jumble, a pastiche. The things we hold highest in our human experience result from a particular agglomeration of ad hoc solutions that have been piled on through millions of years of evolution history. It's not that we have fundamentally human thoughts and feelings despite the kludgy design of the brain as molded by the twists and turns of evolutionary history. Rather, we have them precisely because of that history. The research psychologist Gary Marcus's book Kludge, The Haphazard Construction of the Human Mind compares evolutionary kludges with engineering ones like manifold vacuum-powered windshield wipers. When you accelerated or drove uphill, your wipers slowed to a crawl, or even stopped working altogether. For instance, the vertebrate eye's retina that is installed backward, facing the back of the head rather than the front. As a result, all kinds of stuff gets in its way, including a bunch of wiring that passes through the eye and leaves us with a pair of blind spots, one in each eye. Other uses: in the science fiction television series Andromeda, genetically engineered human beings called Noetskians use the term disparagingly to refer to genetically unmodified humans. In John Varley's 1985 short story Press Enter, the antagonist, a reclusive hacker with unprecedented access to many databases, adopts the identity Charles Kludge. See also, bricolage, jugged, an Indian version of kludge, bodge, an English term of similar meaning. MacGyver, unintended consequence. References. External links: First usage of kludge on Usenet, First usage of kludge on Usenet, The Jargon File, Kludge, Worldwide Words, Kludge, Workarounds, Make Work, and Kludges, Philip Koopman and Robert R. Hoffman.